Before we head back over to the routers and get our line protocol issues straightened out, just a couple of quick things here about PAP and CHAP and some differences between the two. One major difference is that CHAP is much more aggressive than PAP is. Let's assume that R1 is authenticating R3. With PAP, R1 is just sitting there. It's being very passive. Even begins, PAP begins with PA, passive begins with PA. And it's just waiting for R3 to present a password. And it's just sitting there whistling, and hanging out, and R3 just says, hey, here's my password, I'd like to authenticate. Well, with CHAP, Router 1 challenges Router 3 to prove its identity. And to use the buzzword bingo word, I promise I won't use this word very often, CHAP is much more proactive than PAP is. But it really is. R1 now is basically, saying, halt, who goes there? And Router 3 is saying, hey, hold your fire, calm down, here's my identification. So that's one major difference between the two, and I think we'll see at least one more before we're done here. Now we're going to start our CHAP configuration by creating a username password database. And if the word database gives you, the heebie-jeebies or anything like that, don't worry about it because it's a simple username password command. It is not a complex database. What we'll do on Router 3 is create a database with Router 1's name and the password CCNA in uppercase, and on Router 1 we'll create an entry with Router 3's name and the same password. So before we do that though, let's go ahead and bring up our line protocol. This is just a quick reminder here too of where to spot the encapsulation, because here on Router 3 I ran show interface serial 1, and you see it right there, we're running PPP, and on the other end of that same link we are running HDLC, so that is definitely going to bring the old line protocol down. So there's no use in going forward with authentication unless we have everything up and running in the first place. I had a debug running there that I'm going to turn back on here shortly, which is why we saw those PPP messages. And there's your line protocol change state to up. And we'll go ahead and put our database entries in now, and we'll also just make sure the line protocol stays up at the same time. 1 second. And there we go. So it's username. So CCNA. And so far so good on that line protocol. We didn't see any messages there that had gone down or anything. So we are looking good. Before we get started with CHAP here, I'm going to tell you something and show you something on the live equipment that definitely falls under the category of I wish someone had told me that when I was studying for the CCNA. Whenever you are working on lab equipment, and if your simulation or GNS3 allows it, run debugs when things are running correctly. You don't want to wait until you're troubleshooting, whether it's in a controlled environment or a production environment, because then you're running the debugs and you'll get some good information, but you're not sure what it's supposed to look like when it's working correctly. And that's why I do that as often as I can in my course. It's like, let's look at a ping when it's working, sending it to somebody, and then we know what we're aiming for. So what we'll do here, I'm going to show you a debug that actually I believe I already have running. So it gives me, okay, I'm not. So we got this PPP messages anyway. Let's run debug PPP authentication. And this is a great little debug. It's not going to give you a ton of info, but hopefully when our authentication works here in a moment, we'll see exactly what a successful PPP CHAP authentication looks like, and then we'll know what we're aiming for when we're trying to fix one later. So right now, let's go ahead back to the interface. Now MS CHAP does not exist as far as the CCNA goes. We're not going to work with it. It doesn't hurt to know it's one of your options. But the big two options we're concerning ourselves with are PAP and CHAP. Also, when you're in the middle of an authentication like this, be prepared for the line protocol to go down. Because for a moment there, you're going to have one side challenging somebody and the other side isn't even configured with CHAP yet. So that can happen. It might happen to us here, and if it does, we'll just reset the interface to get authentication rocking and rolling. Actually, it's this side. Let's see what happens here. Bingo. Okay, it worked beautifully, and you know what? That's all you're going to get. That's probably the shortest debug information you're ever going to get. But this is exactly what we want. And also, debugs, to me, really help you learn this stuff because you're not just learning a command. There's nothing wrong with that. We got to know the commands. But it shows you what else is going on, and this really sticks in your head when you can see this stuff. So it's great to run debugs as often as you can in controlled environments. So we've got our challenges, one's going out, one's coming in. We've got our responses, one's going out, one's coming in, and you can see who it's from. And then finally, we have 2 success messages at the end, and we never argue with success. We're always happy to have that. So that is exactly what a PPP CHAP authentication should result in. 2 challenges, 2 responses, 2 successes, of course, assuming that you're running it 2 ways, which is exactly what we're doing here. Now that we know what the debug is when things are great, we're going to run a lab where the authentication's off a bit. What I'm going to do, going into the next video, I'm going to mess around with the database entry on R1 a little bit and change it to lowercase. And then when we come back, we'll reset an interface and you'll see exactly what happens when the password, it does not match. So I'll see you in the next video. We'll run that lab.